But who holds them accountable though? So banks create money out of nothing. Who holds them accountable? Everybody has somebody to be held accountable to. Who are they being held accountable to?
That's right. Now, that's where it gets interesting. And we can go back to Japan now. Because once you realize, well, wow, this is how powerful banks are. Because you see, their decision, who gets new money, who gets a loan, means somebody gets new money that didn't exist before, and that will have an impact on the economy. And the question is also, what is it going to be used for? Which types of transactions? Is it going to be for consumption? And banks usually copy each other. So if the banks lend a lot for consumption, then you will get inflation. That's something we need to talk about later, because that's what we're currently getting. And I've been warning since 2020 that we'll get significant inflation now, unlike, for example, after the 2008 crisis and the bailout measures then. It's very different now. This is inflationary. If banks create money and it's used for purchases of ownership rights, such as property, real estate, or financial assets, all these loans to do financial deals, that will push up asset prices, because it's like creating new money. Say, let's look at real estate, property. If banks give out a lot of property loans, real estate loans, it's like printing money and pumping it into the property market. What's going to happen? Right. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know, okay, they're pushing up asset prices. And the third possibility, and there's only these three really, the third possibility, that's the redeeming feature of banks. If banks give a loan, that means they create credit, they create money, and give it to a firm for productive business investment that implements new ideas, new technologies, increases productivity. That gives us economic growth without inflation. That gives us job creation. That gives us really what we want without all the negatives, without asset price inflation, without consumer price inflation, without banking crises. Whereas the other type, lending for consumption and also bank credit for asset purchases, you get the asset bubble. And after the asset bubble, you will always get, and this is also what happened in Japan, of course, most dramatically, you'll get a bust asset bubble and then a bust banking system. And when the banks shut down, they don't lend at all, then you also don't get economic growth, because for growth, we need new money creation in the system. And so I formalized that and tested that in the early 90s on Japan. It's the general quantity theory, or the quantity theory of credit, of disaggregated credit, where you recognize money creation. Money is actually credit, bank credit. That's how you measure the money supply correctly. Central banks will always tell you, money supply, we don't know what the money supply is. We don't really know. The textbooks also say that. We don't know what money is. Come on, gotta be kidding me. They just didn't want to tell you the true story. It is bank credit. We can measure it. It can be identified quite clearly. And the question is, what is this being used for? And so if it's used for productive purposes, that's when you get job creation, growth, no inflation. You get all the positive things and not the negative things, asset bubbles, banking crises, increased inequality and inflation, all these things. That's when it's used for unproductive and therefore unsustainable purposes. And of course, there's something we should talk about later as well. How can you have a banking system that does the right things and therefore supports the economy best? It's when you have many, many small banks, local banks, community banks, and that explains why the US economy, despite the various bad government policies that have been going on for a long time, is still fundamentally quite strong. The secret of the strength of the US economy, and also actually the German economy for the last 200 years, and also the Japanese economy, is because they've got hundreds, if not thousands, of small local community banks that lend mainly to small firms, because the small firms mostly engage in productive business investment, which creates jobs, gives you growth without the bad stuff, without the inflation, without the asset bubbles and banking crisis and so on. But of course, things can also go wrong, particularly, again, when the central banks intervene.